This is Bobby and Paul. We are here with episode 8 of Free to Speak. We did have a shorter episode last week.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, Paul, we had talked about traditional gender roles, and we had talked about how those were changing, and we talked about some of the things related to traditional ideals of masculinity being unfortunately seen as being more toxic, and you've seen males kind of being a little bit devalued, maybe in a sense, by woke culture.
I would say emasculated.
And that led to a comment that we received from somebody from a couple of weeks ago that we responded to, in which they talked about how all of this could potentially lead to more suicides. So that led us into a discussion, a very brief discussion, introducing the topic of suicides specifically as it relates to males. You had also mentioned some things about statistics last week, Paul, that the male suicide rate is 2 times higher than it is for females. That's a global statistic. So in the world, the rate of male suicides is twice that of the rate of female suicides. But it's also interesting to know, and maybe this is something we can talk about later, that women tend to think about suicide more and in fact actually attempt suicide more. It's just that males tend to be more successful at suicide, and it's probably because they use more lethal means. So women think about suicide more, they attempt suicide more, but males actually commit suicide more. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this phenomena of suicides being greater among males than among females, but I wanted to get in a little bit more detail on this by comparing how things are, globally to how they are in the US and to how they are in Uganda. Because in the world, the actual number, it's close to 2. You'd mentioned it's about twice as much, but it's close to 2. It varies from year to year. And in Uganda, it's about 2.2. So the male suicide rate is 2.2 times the rate of female suicides. So Uganda's pretty close to the world at large. But where it gets interesting, Paul, is when we look at Western culture, when we look at Western countries like Europe and the United States, where suicide rates among males are 3 to 4 times higher than the rate of female suicides. So I'm wondering, Paul, and the question that I'm asking is, we're talking about woke culture and how it's devaluing those traditional ideals of masculinity and characterizing them as being toxic. So I'm wondering, Paul, a couple of questions I have is, one, is to what extent is males and their maleness, I guess, so to speak, being devalued, playing a role in these suicides? And what does that imply for Uganda and its suicide rate among males if Uganda continues to be influenced by these Western values?
About the Western world, they are moving faster than us, and it's more to our luck that we are moving slow, especially in Uganda. We are luckier that we are moving slower. The world is moving at a remarkably frantic pace that it is self-destructing as fast. But then for us, the underdeveloped people or the underdeveloped countries, we are moving at a slow pace, much as we're being forced to adopt some of the Western cultures, which some of these are not as helpful and they're toxic and leading us to more toxicity, basically. But we're taking them slow anyway. And maybe that could be the reason why our suicide rates are lower than compared to the Western world. Obviously, there are always other reasons where people commit suicide.
Right, and I want to get into that too. Because I think that the temptation here is we've focused a lot on woke culture. And we don't want to get into the trap of blaming everything on woke culture. And I'm trying to avoid that. But so I'm just kind of asking the question about what role do we think woke culture is playing in this? And then I want to also talk about what are other factors that are leading to the higher suicide rates among males.
So thank you very much. So I was trying to not 100% blame the woke culture for the suicide rates. I'd like to get to the male-female analysis. Basically, internationally, how males are socialized is a little different or slightly different from how females are socialized. For example, males are socialized to be more self-contained, and by self-contained, I mean they should be able to, per se, man up. I may not believe in that terminology as well, but you'd understand men are meant to man up, like to face
problems. At least we're told to do that.
They're supposed to face problems as a man. That's a traditionalistic way of approaching manhood. They should face their fears, they should not whine, not look for relatively small things. But then females are raised to seek support. Females are raised to abide in someone, for help. for example, the husband or family. And it's not so queer when a woman cries in public. It's not queer. There's nothing awkward about that.
But if you see a man do that in public,
yeah,
it kind of makes people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. And there was the time I was at the shop, and there's this little boy, I think he's around, let's say 10 years old, who was riding a bike, and he came very fast and just crashed. The first response from the people around was to laugh. Everyone just laughed at him. Mm-hmm. It was funny. It was hilarious that he fell. He had to pick himself up and run away in shame. I asked the people around, like, imagine it was a girl.
Would they have laughed?
Would it be funny? Then obviously no.
Everybody would be sympathizing.
Yeah, they'll be like, oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. And it's okay, and that's still a traditionalistic way of approaching things. That's how it is. Men are not supposed to cry. Apparently, I've studied psychology and we're taught otherwise, but that's okay. The idea is we want a balanced approach, We don't want to look at where it fits our narrative, we throw men under the bus. Then where it doesn't serve our narrative, then we put them up. Something like that. Mm-hmm. Let us be consistent in how we approach issues. So if you're saying men are equal to females, then the treatment should as well maybe be equal. Traditionally, men are raised that way, to self-medicate, to always find solutions, whereas the female traditionally had been raised to expect support from the man. The man should find a solution. In a traditional sense, men are more prone to suicide. Why? Because...
they're more prone to succeed in suicide.
No, they are more prone to suicide. Look, it's to suicide success, yeah.
To suicide success, because the one factor I want to bring into this is the fact that women actually attempt suicide 2 to 4 times more, at a 2 times more greater rate than males do. But they're not successful at it as much.
Yeah, my opinion might be subjective, and I might beg to differ from Bobby, in that if I'm arguing this in a traditional sense, men are more prone to suicide, even the ideation as in itself. Traditionally, a man would be more prone to think about suicide. Why? Because they have a lot of burden on them to take care of family, to stand up, to man up, to not fail in life, to succeed. Whereas the woman, traditionally, whatever burden she has, it's okay for her to throw it towards the man. And the man should be able to support all the families. So that's in a traditional sense. So if I look at things in that line, then a woman would have lesser burden that would push her to a point of feeling suicidal. Barring things like domestic violence, that's what would cause them to, that's one of the reasons that would push them that way. Or the man is cheating and then she's getting depressed and beyond it. But, the burden of the pain of earning a living and success was carried by the man, traditionally. That alone is stress enough to put a man in a place where if he's not succeeding, he's shamed, he's belittled. Traditionally, men would be more prone to suicide. But then things have changed. So in contemporary times, is that things that women have been put in a place where they are no longer traditional. So we expect more from them. We put you in school, we give you a job, we tell you you're equal to the man. Obviously, the pressure that men used to bear almost alone or entirely on themselves is now shared. So females can now experience what men have experienced. No wonder the suicide or suicidality is high on their side as well. We've exposed the woman for the gunfire that the men used to shield them from. And no wonder we're having more suicidal ideation among them, because they've been put in a role that wouldn't per se traditionally wasn't designed for them or biologically. The female have been put in a place where now they're taking the mantle on their own. So in a way, so gender roles are being swapped subliminally. There are people who are doing it intentionally, but for the people who are being affected, it's a subliminal change happening for gender roles. So females are now taking this center stage. It exposes you to a lot of stress, and inevitably suicide rates are going to go high. But yet still, much as technically equally exposed to stress that would lead us to suicidal ideation, females have more ideation than males.
Ideation, you mean they have more of a thought?
Ideas.
Towards
the idea of thoughts. They plan suicide way more than men.
Right. But you're arguing that prior to the influence of modern day cultural values, that we did not see this.
Yeah, I wasn't there, but I'm speculating.
But you're speculating, but what is the data? Do we have any data that would support this this idea?
If you look at the statistics, I believe you'll find that suicidal ideas or suicidality was less among females in the prior days. Ideally, the reason why in the United States or in the Western world the rates are way higher is because this modernization has gone way farther than us here in Africa. I usually joke that America is probably 200 years ahead of Uganda, which will take us some time to get to the place where America is, in the positives as well as the negatives. Exposing the woman in the position the man traditionally had is exposing her to the stresses that men experience traditionally. You're exposing them to stress that would potentially get them suicidal. But then, still, much as we're in a modern society, there's a bit of two-facedness or something like that, where we're raising modern children, but then there's still a subtle idea of traditional gender roles in there. In that you find, like we shared earlier, that you find that however much a woman will earn a lot of money, she will still expect a man to take care of her. That's a traditional gender role in a modern woman. Yet still, you find that much as we're in a modern world, men are still socialized to not talk about their problems, to self-medicate, to man up basically. And women are raised, or females are raised to seek support, to talk. Males will conceal their problems and they'll struggle with them. So,
and males won't talk about their problems with each other.
Yeah.
Though
because
it's generally most males don't necessarily want to hear about all the other problems that the other men are experiencing. We'd rather sit around and watch football.
And even the man who is struggling may not necessarily want to look weak in front of other males. So, but females, when they're weak, even the others will empathize with them, whether they're hypocritical or whatever, but they'll still show some sort of empathy and they'll support one another. So,
well, women don't necessarily like to see men showing weakness either.
Exactly, yeah. So in other words, the culture is putting a man out there and like, you can't cry, you can't be weak. That alone puts him in a place where even if he was suicidal, you might not notice that the man is suicidal. So, and even those statistics that men attempt suicide or have more suicidal ideas than women, I would say the statistic or the research, whatever they did, is flawed, because how are you going to find it? It's going to be underscored, because most males will not even show anything. You will not know. So you can only speculate. You only know until they've committed suicide or they've attempted and, they've failed. That's when you know. But the female, she'll talk about it. She'll come and be like, okay, you guys, I feel I'm tired. I feel I want to...
But maybe that's the reason why the suicide rate is higher among females, because if a male fails to commit suicide, he might not report it or admit it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, right. So the actual rate of attempted suicides is probably higher among males.
Yeah, it's way higher.
Yeah.
So
and that's probably some of what you were getting.
That's what I was getting to, basically. And for females, she will talk about her issues. You will visibly see that she's distressed, whereas a man will do whatever it takes to conceal their distress. They will still want to show that they're strong, even when they're weak. So you really have to be so critical to know that this man is distressed. But then for a female, it will be written all over her face that she's not doing well. So even at that early stage of, that's the stress or depression or anxiety, a female can get help. But even if she goes beyond that and she starts ideas of committing suicide, females have been raised to not be as aggressive. So when a female is trying to commit suicide, she'll probably get scared that
if she won't use as lethal means.
Yeah, as lethal means. She will fear the pain and all that. But then when the male will be in a place where, okay, if I have to do it, I have to do it.
Man is more functional. He'll look at, what do I have to do to make this happen?
Yeah, so how do I get it done quick?
So how do I do this in the most efficient manner so that it gets done quickly, I don't feel as much pain
So that's why you find that most of the time when a female commits suicide, usually it's going to be poisoning, and they'll overdose and they'll maybe throw themselves in front of a bus. But a male would typically get a rope and just hang. Yeah,
which is how several famous people like Robin Williams, for example, went.
Exactly. Or they'll jump off a building. It's not so typical that a female would jump off a building.
Or a bridge.
Exactly. So, but then the male would. So a female would probably want to overdose and whatever. But it's more common for males to go the extreme. I think it's more natural. It's more of a biological factor. So they will go for the extreme because maybe it's in their DNA to push that further. So a female would try less lethal means and she'll probably get saved. Whereas a male, you just find him dead. It's done. So no wonder males who attempt most often times.
They're probably not reporting it, but the females.
Saved.
Right.
And
so we really don't know.
Yeah, we might never know, really.
Right. but we're just basing it on the best available data. But the data is flawed because it's incomplete.
Yeah.
You know, the tendency of males not to report, like males generally won't report a lot of things that would be more shameful to them to experience. Like, for example, if a male is sexually assaulted or molested as a child, a male is less likely to admit that than a woman will. So it doesn't just apply to suicide, it can apply to other sort of traumas that males might experience.
That's where the stigma with mental illness comes in. When a man is depressed, you not want people to know that he's depressed. When a man is having anxieties, they'll probably try to face them regardless. When a man wants to commit suicide, you may never know. Men who are going through domestic violence, they never tell. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, they actually never may be.
Never is a strong word, but yeah, they're less likely to.
Yeah, they are less likely to.
There's been studies that have been done on this too, that men actually experience sexual abuse and sexual assault much more frequently than was previously believed.
Yeah.
There's actually been studies that have shown this. It's just that men are less likely to report that they've actually experienced it.
Males might struggle a lot with mental illness or mental struggles and suicidality, and not talk about it because of fear of being judged or emasculated.
What would actually push somebody to the edge of committing suicide versus somebody who would not be pushed to the edge of committing suicide? So, for example, Paul, when I look at my own life, and I've got decades of experience, but I've never been to a point in my life where I actually said, I want to kill myself, or where I attempted to kill myself. So I've never actually attempted suicide. But I've been through hard times in my life where I just have these thoughts, whether or not I meant them or not. They're just thoughts that pop into your head. This is just too much. I feel like I want to die. But what you're saying is you don't really want to die. You just want whatever you're feeling to go away. And so there's a question that kind of pops into my head is, what's the difference between a person like me who goes through hard times, but who never actually thinks of killing myself? Or never attempts it, versus somebody who goes that length to actually make the attempt to kill themselves or succeeds in killing themselves. I put a lot of thought into this about what is the difference there. And we received a comment last week when we did our brief discussion about suicides, and it was a rather lengthy comment. And most of it didn't really have to do directly with what we were talking about. But I want to focus on the small piece of this that I think is really insightful on the process that a person goes through that leads them from experiencing hardships and sadness and despair to that point where they will actually take their life. This person wrote that suicides are almost always because sadness worsens. Inevitably, we see bad things in life. Impacts from bad things, such as wars, abuse, and disease, are stronger than the impacts from good things. Good things such as birth, marriage, and they put in here snow, so apparently this person likes snow. I'm not sure of the snow. It's kind of a but the point is that there are things in life that have negative impacts. There are bad things that have negative impacts. And there are things, positive things, that have good impacts. And so what he's talking about is for these people that go to the point of suicide, the impacts from the bad things are stronger or more weighty, maybe we can say, than the good things. So this person goes on to say, if one works in jobs such as police, soldiers, paramedics, etc., impacts from bad things come with those jobs. While the 30s are a person's peak, so I think he's talking about the age range when you're in your 30s, the 30s are the peak when it comes to physical and mental. So I think he's saying that you're at your physical and mental peak when you're in your 30s. One must know what to do in hard times, though, regardless of age. Suicides happen because one can no longer handle depression or sadness caused by bad events. Modern society worsens sadness, such as internet junkies who watch bad things which make them sad. So this person is tying it into some of the things we talked about a few weeks ago when we talked about social media and the negative impacts that social media is having. And so that's kind of increasing the despair as well. So he goes on to say, sadness comes before suicides. Drug use and alcohol are also used by people who can't handle sadness. Suicide is the last thing to happen after all that sadness leading to drug use and finally ends in death. So what I find interesting about this comment, Paul, is this person seems to have a good handle on the progression that takes place within a person, so that we have these good experiences in life and we have these bad experiences in life. And there are people for whom the bad experiences or the impacts from the bad experiences are outweighing the impacts from the good experiences. And it's intensifying and enhancing, he calls it sadness. Maybe I would call it despair or pain. Yeah. So it's enhancing the pain, it's enhancing the despair. And so what happens is they then begin to look for ways to deal with that pain. And the example that this commenter uses is alcohol and drugs. But of course, alcohol and drugs aren't going to take away the pain and actually could enhance the pain. Or it might give you a temporary escape from pain and from the despair and from the sadness. But then when you come out of it, you're still dealing with the pain and whatever you're going through. Plus you're dealing with all the problems that are being caused by the alcohol use and by the drug, and by the drug use. And eventually that's going to lead to people being so overwhelmed with pain and sadness they can't deal with it and they commit suicide. I think probably the way that I would summarize this, and the person didn't use the word hope, but I think that the difference between somebody like me who can experience hardship but not get to the point where I want to kill myself versus somebody who can, I think it's because of this element of hope. So if you have a support system, you have family, you have friends who are understanding of what you're going through, they can give you hope that you're going to get through this. If you have a faith in God, that faith in God can get you through the hardship that you're going through. And so what happens is people who lack this hope, maybe they don't have that support system. They don't have faith in God. They don't have enough confidence in their ability to get them through whatever hardship that they're going through. And so they use means to drown it out. But the element that they're missing that they need to get them through this difficult time is hope. They don't have hope, and hope makes the difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when this person says that there's no way they're going to get over this problem, there's no way there's no light at the end of the tunnel, then they get overwhelmed and, they rush into decisions and, suicide comes in as the ultimate, But the difference, I would say still, between the Western world and, let's say, Uganda, is that the Western world is, maybe I would go with individualism.
Individualism?
Maybe.
Yeah, Western world is very individualistic.
Yeah, so everyone minds their own business.
Yeah.
And,
right, that's definitely America. That's not the attitude of everybody. I know that when I was in the U.S., I didn't know who my neighbors were. People around me didn't know who their neighbors were.
Yeah, so now we are adopting, the idea is, when I'm overwhelmed by my own problems, that means me, as Paul, I cannot help myself. If I'm operating with an internal locus of control, then I get overwhelmed. Obviously, I'm more prone to commit suicide. But then, if I have a support structure and I know that, okay, now me, I'm overwhelmed, but I have my dad, I have my sister, I have my friend, I have my workmates, and, we are operating in a community kind of, way of life, then I know I have a structure around me that could see me through even when I'm overwhelmed. I see it here, more here in the towns. The wealthier people, the ones who are more elite and more educated and have more money, they are more of Americans in Uganda.
They're more like Americans.
They're acting like the Americans. They're acting more Western. They build houses with very long fences. No one can come through.
Cutting themselves off.
They cut themselves off. They are in essence an island. And no wonder, many a time when things go wrong, they get intoxicated and they get into addictions with substance use because they've enclosed everyone out and they're on their own. And then their ego can't let them break out of it. So you find that you create your own island and then your own island suffocates you. The water will come and flood, the floods will take you. And that could as well explain why males commit suicide more, because they are raised to be an island and they commit suicide more. And that would also explain better why the Western world, the suicide rates are way higher than here, because they raised them to be an island. I can take care of myself. I have to do everything for myself, everyone for himself.
When I was in college, I had a friend who, he seemed like a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. We laughed, we joked around. He gave me no indications that anything was wrong in his life. Then one day he came out and said, I tried to kill myself 4 months ago. I said, what? And he told me how he took a whole bottle of aspirin, swallowed it, but ended up throwing it all up. And he got very sick, but he didn't die. And I just remember being shocked because how did I not know that he was going through this? And in fact, I asked him, well, how are you doing now? He says, oh, I'm doing great, and da-da-da. And he's, and he talked about how things had changed, but how at the time he didn't feel like anybody cared about him. And he went through this very dark time, but he came out of it. He didn't tell me for months. And so
it was more comfortable telling you after his way through it.
Yes, after he had come out. So he's telling me about this not while he's going through his time of despair. He told me about it after he had come out of this valley that he had gone through. So now his life is better. Now he's comfortable telling people what happened, but he wouldn't tell anybody at the time that it actually happened. I asked him, why didn't you tell anybody? And he says, I didn't want to tell anybody because I just wanted to die. I didn't think anybody cared.
I wanted to say something about, our previous topics. We've been talking about wokeness and how it's affecting the world. Let's say, point in case is most of these rights that are being advocated for, changes to the gender role, most of the time it's males who are being pressured to accept them. And the responsibility falls on the man to respect these rights. And the females, on the other hand, they are more on the receiving end of the rights. There's less responsibility imposed on them. And onto males, we are imposing a lot of responsibility and a lot of do's and don'ts. Even this in itself is overwhelming men. You find that when let's say, because of too much emancipation, we have too many divorces, but males are supposed to pay child support while their children are taken away from them. The children stay with the woman, but then the man has to pay child support. Even when this woman is empowered and she has a job, she can take care of herself. And even the man ideally should be doing the same thing for taking care of himself, but then he still has to give child support to the woman. So yeah, probably that's how the modernity is also affecting men's mental health.
All right, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for this week, Paul.
Yeah,
I think we covered pretty good ground on this, and maybe we might pick a different topic next week. I mean, there's so many topics.
Yeah.
But again, as we always say, if there's something you want us to talk about, please put them in the comments. We love getting your comments, and we love to use your comments to lead into our next discussions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we'll see you again in 7 days.